To introduce this next keynote to you. When we were lucky enough to be in Jerusalem for the World Union conference, it was exciting to hear Rabbi Friedlander talk about the challenge to liberal Judaism. World Union, yes. To talk about the challenge to liberal Judaism. And at that conference, we asked him whether he would do us the honour of coming and speaking to us at our Biennial in Birmingham, and he agreed, and a year in the planning, here he is. He's going to be in conversation with our own Rabbi Danny Rich. Great chance to welcome him back from his sabbatical in this conversation. So first, Danny is going to speak to us. Sorry, Rabbi Friedlander, to separate the two Dannys, is going to speak to us. And then there will be a conversation with Rabbi Rich, followed by which there will be a chance to have questions from our audience. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Friedlander.
Shabbat Shalom. So about a month ago, my wife and I spit up some of our saliva into these little tubes and sent them off to an internet site called 23andMe. It's one of the sites that will analyze your DNA and your haplogroup and all your descendants. I sent the saliva in, and about a week later, I got an email sending me to a site. And on the site, it gave me a list of 1,100 individuals who have already also sent their saliva in to this site, who are relatives of mine. I went down the list. I only recognized one. And then I decided to go close. I wanted to take a look at people who had shared at least 5 to 8% of their DNA with me, who they called my second cousins. That's pretty close. That means that we shared a great-grandparent. And I went through the list, and I started writing, looking at the family histories, where they came from. And my family's been in the United States since the early 1880s. So I don't really know where in Poland or Russia my great-great-grandparents came from. So I could only track where they had been in North America. And I found out that there were about a dozen people there who clearly are cousins, who are children of siblings of one of my great-grandparents with names I've never heard before. And I'm trying to figure out what happened, where are they from? So I took a trip to Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where I was born, and my father and my grandfather were all born, and went to the cemetery, because when you track Hebrew names, one of the best ways to do is to look at the father's name, and families often buried together. So I found the family plot, and I found some siblings of my great-grandfather who had different last names, though the wife had married, which I was unfamiliar with, which matched some of the names on my list. So I'm walking through the cemetery, and next to the Friedlander plots, there was a whole bunch of Matic plots, M-A-T-T-U-C-K. And I'm looking at them, and I'm realizing that family came to this community in the same year that my family did, and that an individual named Israel Matic was born in that community and went to high school with my grandfather. And I'm sort of blown away by all these connections. And then I left from there. I had to be in Jerusalem for 10 days. I flew to Jerusalem, and I'm reading histories of the World Union, and I realized that in the beginning of progressive Judaism, liberal Judaism, there was liberal Judaism. There was LJS. And the core of all of international progressive Jewry tracks back to the early 20th and pre-World War II years, in particular the creation of the World Union by Lily Montagu in 1926, and the influence that this movement has had on world Jewry is immeasurable. If it wasn't for this movement and its creation of the World Union, we would not have sent rabbis to South Africa or Australia or South America in the 30s to begin congregations, which became huge Jewish communities in the late 30s and the 1940s as refugees poured in for Germany. But we funded them to be there. And if you look at the history of the movement, and you look at the 1950s and the funding, the World Union's funding of the creation of synagogues in Israel, the precursor to the IMPJ was the World Union's funding of synagogues in Haifa, Yerushalayim, and Tel Aviv. Now, by the way, all three models sort of failed. It didn't really work until Israeli-born, Israeli-ordained rabbis took over those congregations and turned them into Israeli Reform congregations. But what else did the World Union do in the 30s? They created a rabbinical school in Paris, 1954, to train progressive rabbis for Europe. It's the precursor to Leo Baeck College. And that failed for, unfortunately, financial reasons after several years. And Leo Baeck College was founded in London. But if you track the history, none of this takes place without the courage and the vision and the commitment of a handful of leaders of liberal Judaism to see their Judaism as being more than the Judaism of the United Kingdom and more than the Judaism of Europe, but as a long-term contribution to the trajectory, the cycle, the chain of tradition of Judaism. Now, it's clear to me that we are in a time of huge transition in the Jewish world. Take a look at anything going on in Israel and realize there's no middle ground anymore. There's very little shared. No one can seem to agree on anything for political reasons. So they can't decide on who is a Jew for conversion things. They can't decide who can pray where because of political blockages. It seems to me that somewhere in the world, someone's going to have to take leadership and say, we're not second-class Jews. We're not the others. We are, in fact, the true inheritors of the very creative vision of the rabbis in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century who created a brand new Judaism. Sacrificial Judaism, biblical Judaism ended, and everything was created from scratch. I mean, biblical names are all patrilineal, right? Rabbinic names are all matrilineal. Everything changed. And I have a feeling that in the 21st century, we're living in a time period very much like the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, and none of us will live to see where it ends up, but we're going to end up with a different dominant Judaism. That the struggles that are going on in Israel today are in fact quite similar to the struggles in the 1st century in Palestine, and we don't know where the majority will be in the future. But if we don't present a credible alternative, a powerful alternative, a dynamic, exciting, self-confident alternative, then we're basically going to say, okay, we'll continue to spend our lives compromising with Haredim and getting as much as we can rather than being dynamic and being creative. So in that cemetery in Worcester, I was grateful to my grandparents and that whole generation of immigrants who gave me the confidence to, at different times of my life, have the courage to create new forms of Judaism that had not existed before and that were very much rejected by Jewish Establishments. But through persistence, we see Amcha determines ultimately what Judaism is. If you want to see what Judaism really is, go in the street and see what the Jews are doing. Therefore, I was thrilled when I became president of the World Union to work with the organization to help focus our work so that we weren't doing everything, but rather focusing on what was most important for an international progressive movement to be doing. We ended up focusing on 3 things. We still focus on 3 things. One is, you can't have Judaism without Jews. So we're very focused on the next generation and how do we create space for young people, for teens, for young adults to own progressive Judaism and not to have to live it out the way their parents did or their grandparents, but to own it on their own. The second area where we're passionate is the need to create new congregations wherever Jews choose to live, just like liberal Judaism did in the 30s when it created a congregation in Melbourne, Australia. Okay, Jews are starting to live there, and we knew that not if we build it they will come, but if we don't get there first and establish something with quality rabbinic leadership, that someone, the Chabad of the 1930s, would get there before us. That's the story today in places as diverse as Bangkok or Seoul or Singapore or Bali. Loads of Jews in those communities now. Those aren't historical communities, they're brand new Jewish communities with hundreds and hundreds of Jews, and whoever creates the most dynamic central Jewish community, it's either going to be us or Chabad, will be the Judaism of the Far East, which will be an economic powerhouse, we know, and Jews always move towards economic powerhouses. So number 2 for us is creating new communities where Jews are likely to move. Keep an eye on Spain. Keep an eye on Italy. And number 3 for us is you can't have a movement without leaders. And in this movement, leaders are both lay leaders and rabbis. And without rabbis, you can have lovely communal groups that care deeply, but there's a limit to how far forward we can advance without strong professional leadership. That's why the health and survival of the Leo Baeck College is so crucial to us. That's why our partnership with the French congregations to send more and more students to the Leo Baeck College is so important. That's why we created a rabbinical school in Moscow that now has 27 full-time students in conjunction with Geiger College. They'll spend 3 years in Moscow, 1 year in Jerusalem, and 2 years in Potsdam. That's why we've created a new institute to train rabbis in Buenos Aires in South America. You cannot send English-speaking rabbis to Spanish-speaking or Russian-speaking or French-speaking countries. It just doesn't work. Our language skills are good, but ultimately you need to know the culture. You need to identify with the Jews you're serving. There's enough challenge bringing American rabbis to the UK or British-born rabbis to North America. There are some cultural differences. But when you add culture and language, it's far more difficult. So we are committed to a flow of rabbis who know the languages of the communities in which they need to serve. Those are the 3 things that the World Union is committing to do in this decade. Now, I just came back from Israel, very frustrated by what I was dealing with. Leah bore the brunt of it, but she's really quite marvelous as chair of Artsenu in knowing how to maneuver the pieces. But we got lectured the other night, I think we should call it, by Natan Sharansky, invited Leah and me and Rick Jacobs and Michael Marmer from HUC and Gilad Kariv from the IMPJ to his room, in the hotel, to sort of be lectured on why are liberal and progressive Jews around the world abandoning Israel. An amazing line, because we were there for the Jewish Agency meeting as full participants in the WZO, but he had read an article which was critical of the reform movement for not taking a consistent, hard-right stand on issues relating to Israel, and that's where he is politically on most Israel issues, and didn't understand why we were abandoning Israel. From a great leader like Sharansky, not to read the things he reads with a sense of nuance, that our Jewish community is a very broad tent, and better to have criticism within the community than to have criticism from outside the community. We can stand a lot of pushing on our boundaries. That's what we stand for, okay? We welcome the comments, we welcome the criticism, as long as there's love and support underneath it. We will never reject Israel, and we'll never reject Judaism and the Jewish people, but l'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to bring the world together to repair some of the not so positive parts of the land and country that we love, and of the Judaism that we love. That's the task we've taken on ourselves. So today I want to present you with 3 specific challenges to you as congregational leaders. I'll quickly go through the first 2, and the third I'll spend some more time on, and I'll be talking more about these tomorrow morning at one of the sessions if you want to discuss it more. But here are the 3 areas that I know what the World Union's doing. Now I want to think about what the congregations need to do for us to be healthy 10 and 20 years from now. Number 1 is a commitment to post-bar mitzvah engagement. Now, I grew up in a Reform Judaism that didn't have bar mitzvah. I was confirmed in a large class, but there was no bar mitzvah in that stage of North American Reform Judaism. We reintroduced bar mitzvah, and all of a sudden, Jewish education in their teens, formal Jewish education, disappeared. I don't know what the answer is here, but I do know that it's our responsibility to track the Jewish engagement of each and every young person who becomes bar mitzvah in our synagogues, to make sure we present them with a variety of Jewish opportunities. There's no one way to become an adult Jew. But some of them may be into camping, and some may be into Israel travel, and some may be into serious study, and some may be into social justice projects. I don't really care which project they do, but a sign of success for a congregation is that every child between the age of 13 and 17 has some Jewish engagement during those teen years. That's a trackable lay leadership project. What those pieces are and how you talk the parents and the kids into it, you know those communities. This is not an easy task. But too many of us just walk from our young people as soon as they become bar mitzvah, and a handful of them become involved in netzer and some other activities. We have to be far more intentional about it. So that's sort of charge number 1. And again, I will talk more about that in tomorrow's session. Charge number 2 is an understanding of Jewish demography. The Ministry of the Diaspora, Naftali Bennett's ministry, commissioned a study that was released at the World Zionist Organization board meeting the other day that Leah and I sat at. And they presented some fascinating information that intuitively we know, but they have no idea what to do with it. So here's the information, that there are significant numbers of people who want to join the Jewish people. There are a significant number of people who are requesting ways to convert to Judaism, and that the Jewish community has not been organized enough to make conversion a reasonably easy access process. There are thousands of people in communities without Jewish communities who want to become Jews. There are entire Jewish communities of individuals who were not born Jewish that converted. Think about the Abu Daya in Uganda. It's a whole other story. But Judaism is not shrinking, was their result, was their conclusion. If you look at Poland today, the majority of Jews on synagogue boards are people who are not born Jewish. Frankly, if you look at the United States or at the UK today, there's a goodly number of individuals on our temple boards who were not born Jewish, but we're now getting to the point in many communities where the majority were not. We should celebrate that. Whoa, people want to be with us. They value our values. They value our communities. What are we afraid of? But this report is going to get put in a drawer and ignored because it's politically dangerous. It means that we're going to have to find a way to say to our colleagues in South America, where there's loads of B'nai Anusim, people with Jewish ancestry who can prove it through their DNA, but who don't look anything like us. The majority of their DNA is South American Indians. And whole communities, I was visiting Guayaquil in Ecuador, and I went to a Friday night service of a congregation, about 120, 130 people there. Almost all the young people had gone on birthright. But none of the movements, including the Reform movement, want to integrate them into their mainstream because they are as dark as, they just don't look like Ashkenazic Jews. There's a subconscious racism there that's problematic. Or last week in Jerusalem, in Israel, one of the major wineries decided that their Ethiopian Jewish employees could not participate in the production of kosher wine because some people wouldn't recognize their Jewishness. Or the Abu Daya in Uganda, which has associated with the Masorti conservative movement. A number of individuals were coming from Masa programs this year, and one coming to the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem, and they were denied visas to come in because the Misrat HaPanim, the Ministry of the Interior, was not sure about their Jewishness. What are we afraid of? Now, I know what the Ministry of the Interior is afraid of, but as I segue into the third area, the second point here is the Jewish community in 15, 20 years, just like your community today, doesn't look anything like it did 20 years ago. Okay, the reality of intermarriage has blessed us with families, when families choose to associate with our congregations and get involved in our worship programs, in our synagogue schools, they create Jews who are exactly like the Jews of two Jewish parents. We've learned that over the last 30, 40 years. We don't like to say it out loud, but we know it intuitively. That's the rest of this demographic revolution which is starting. And we're positioned beautifully to grow from it, to benefit from it. There are people who are searching for their spiritual identities. When we talk about spirituality, we offer a spiritual place. There are people who are lonely looking for a community to associate with. That's what our congregations are. And there are people who realize through these wonderful saliva tests that, whoa, there actually is I'm part of a Jewish line. So I want to say straight out that I think the biggest change from rabbinic Judaism that we're going to see in this century is a real basic definition of who is a Jew. That ultimately, blood will not matter. Ultimately, what will matter are our personal actions, our personal commitments, our personal involvement. Now, I'm not a firm believer in ethnic or secular Judaism. I don't understand how it gets transmitted generation to generation. I'm watching in my own family line one whole line of North American Jews who didn't intermarry but became totally secular, and now, 3 generations later, I can't find any Jews. But the parts of the family that were involved in Jewish communities, leaders of communities involved in synagogues, provided their children with some kind of Jewish education, all of them are still Jews. To me, that's evidence. And I think about our challenges in Israel with the secular population, which is very strong. Some of the secular Jews are rabidly anti-religion because they see religion as the Haredi far right. We offer an alternative. Okay, we believe in peoplehood and we believe in universalism. We're in that line between universalism and particularism. Just take a look at the different versions of the Aleinu in the Siddur this morning. Okay, we're always pulling our heads apart to figure out where are we on that spectrum of, is Judaism a people or is Judaism a religion? And the liberal Jewish answer is yes. You can become a part of our people by living our values, by living our lifestyles. You don't have to have Jewish blood to be a part of our people. That's a huge statement. It's an optimistic statement. It's a way for Judaism, not just liberal Judaism, a way for Judaism to grow in the decades ahead. So we need to, as liberal Jews, embrace a new definition of who is a Jew. Otherwise, we're going to stagnate and shrink. Look at those communities that didn't find a way to welcome in outsiders. I mean, there's the story of the various religious groups that were celibate and did fascinating things. I'm thinking about the Shakers in particular, and had great music and great worship style and great architecture and furniture. Unfortunately, after about 100 years, they died because there was just no continuity whatsoever. I don't think we're attractive enough for people to join without any community to join or any families to join. That's something we offer. The intermarriage rate around the world doesn't vary very much, except in Israel. 40 to 60% of Jews in their 30s who are married to individuals who are not born Jewish. Okay, that's about 50% is sort of the international rate, if you will, no matter where you go. Nothing that we have done has had any major impact in the last 30 years to change that number. We just are too cautious to talk about it publicly. But someday we have to talk about moving our language from being a shanda to it being an opportunity. And for our communities, not just to call themselves welcoming communities, but spend a lot of resources bringing in the non-Jewish spouse into Judaism, and even suggesting to them that they may want to at some point consider converting to Judaism, and that we're going to run with them, walk with them the way into full engagement with our community. Those who have large numbers of Jews by choice in your community know that their commitment to your synagogue is as strong, if not stronger, than individuals who have been Jewish for decades and generations. Mother's blood has not proven to be enough to guarantee Jewish behaviors. We must champion the marketing of the notion that one's behaviors trumps one's blood when it comes to the issues of conversion or acceptance by a congregation. And here's the kicker. And we have to learn how to publicly market that fact. Publicly market the fact that intermarried families are very much welcome to be full members of our congregations. And let's take whatever hits we get from the Jewish press, that non-Jewish spouses are very welcome to fully participate in synagogue life, because how else are they going to figure out if they really want to be Jewish? We have to say this publicly, out loud, and not be embarrassed, not worry ma yomru ha-Yehudim or ha-Charedim. We have to stop looking over our right shoulder and instead look straight ahead and say, we are proud to be Jews, we're proud to be lovers of Israel, we're proud to be progressive Jews creating a new Judaism for the 21st century that may be very different than the progressive Judaism that we inherited from the 19th or the 20th. And it may be radically different than rabbinic Judaism from the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. But this is how Jewish history always plays out. Someone has to be courageous. Someone has to take the lead. And in my mind, the lead and the opportunity that's strongest for us, unlike the, is the area of conversion. Yes, we can work on keeping our Jews as involved as possible. That's our post-bar mitzvah challenge. And yes, we can educate ourselves on the new realities of Jewish demography and become more accepting and conscious of how the future is not going to look like the past. But our attitudes towards conversion, I'm talking about attitudes in our marketing, our public relations, our branding, our public message, that will make the difference between whether we're vibrant, large. Well, as I think of my own country, we've become the dominant religious movement because of our embrace of patrilineality and of conversion. It's made the difference. We gain as many people or more people than we lose. But it's only because we've chosen to be very public about it, very aggressive about it, and very proud that we see ourselves as the future of Judaism, a Judaism that's open, that has minimal boundaries, but very, very high values, very, very high standards. Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, apparently we've just had our time cut in half, is that right now? Which is fine. So, Danny, first of all, thank you. I think you've got a very sympathetic, you couldn't have a more sympathetic audience, I think, here, from a movement which had patrilineality, as it were, or equilineality at its foundation, and you're beginning to sound more like the family buried next to your family, Israel Matek, as you continue to speak. But be that as it may, I suppose if we're talking about mission, and you particularly have talked about mission to what you called intermarried families, the logic for me would be, what about mission to all those who I believe in the States are called unchurched? In other words, people have no religion or are in the wrong religion, that's their choice. I mean, I don't mean I identify them as being the wrong religion, and not satisfied. Why do we not have the courage to go out and say, liberal Judaism is a jewel, it's the jewel of my life, and if you want to hear more about it, I don't care whether you're married to another Jew or you've got or your spittle can prove that you're Jewish. If you're interested, come to us, and we will go not literally knocking on your doors, but metaphorically knocking on your doors to create new Jews.
I love the idea. One of the most interesting programs I've seen is one called A Taste of Judaism. And it was a 3-session program run in synagogues where the movement in North America created a syllabus, trained lay people and rabbis to do 3 very high-powered sessions. One on belief on God and spirituality, one on peoplehood and Israel, and one on learning and debate. And they advertised this not in the Jewish papers at all. They went to the secular press. They took in full-page ads. They spent more on the publicity here than they did on the actual program.
So you might see an advert. We had a debate. He said there was an article in the Times. I looked at it and I said, the New York Times he's talking about. For us, it would be the Times we'd have. The London Times we'd have our big advert in, Cameron. But we'll have our big advert in.
And the follow-up, the people who go to that class, we capture their email addresses, and then you can send them information about conversion opportunities or synagogue involvement opportunities. But it starts as a free, no requirements. The Jewish community wants you to know there is, now frankly, there are Jewish groups that do this. Let's face it, Chabad is very good at this. I'm not sure we're ever going to be on the street corner asking people to put on tefillin. But
why couldn't we be on the street corner saying, as a Jew, join us for a Syrian refugee project?
To some degree, my reform and liberal Jewish genes are too introverted to allow me to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but boy, it's not in my bones. So I'm willing to use the internet, I'm willing to do social media campaigns, I'm willing to do general media, because I can only do what I can pull off. Now, there may be people here who would stand on the street corner and talk to people. I don't think it's wrong. It's just of shlichim, like the missionaries, liberal Jewish missionaries who are comfortable with that. We have, listen, our Netzer kids are liberal Jewish missionaries for a whole range of sources. But when you put 18-year-olds in the street corner, you can't really control.
Gillian. Okay, we've got Toby. Sorry, forgive me. I can't always see everybody who's at the back.
Hi.
Right, Ellie.
I mean, I love that idea. I started wearing a kippah, 15 years ago, all the time, just to be a Jew on the street. And the number of times I'm stopped, in fact, the last time was actually on the tube coming to the conference. 3 people got on. I thought, I bet they're Israeli. So one sits next to me and he says, "You're Jewish." So I said, "Yes, I am. Kippah, yeah." Anyway, so we started having a conversation. He said, "You should be in Israel." And I said, "Well, we need to have Jews here. We've got, you've come here for the first time." The point is that people stop me all the time and I have conversations. And I don't say, they say, "Is that a Jewish hat you're wearing?" And I say, "Yes." And they say, "Why are you wearing it?" or whatever. I say, not that I'm a rabbi, because that would be too easy. I say I'm a progressive Jew. And they say, "What's that?" And then we have, progressive Jew, liberal Jew. I say the most inclusive thing I can say. and then we have a conversation. And it's on the seafront, it's in a cafe, it's in a queue at the checkout at the supermarket. So I would like to encourage all liberal Jews to look Jewish out on the street
I think you just
and
persuaded
engage
me,
with
Ellie.
people.
I think Ellie's just persuaded me to wear kippah. Not in services, but out in the street.
But there's another message here. One is that we are proudly asserting that we're comfortable with multiple identities. That
John.
I feel very Jewish and I feel very American and very much a Zionist. That I can live with that tension. Okay, that I don't have to choose one or the other. And that's the unique contribution of diaspora Jewry to the Jewish world. So in this, how do we start talking about that? And we really haven't said you have to be either this or that, but rather you can be a great British citizen and a great Jew without tension. Well, it's always going to be tension if you get in the political realm.
John.
Yeah, this may go down as an unpopular opinion, but forget going out there as missionaries. How about actually letting non-Jews come into synagogues? I mean, I don't know if anyone has had the experience. I was visiting a city that shall remain nameless and wanted to take my Unitarian friends along to a Reform synagogue that shall remain nameless, and they needed to see my passport, I had to send in advance, they needed affirmation from my own community. I thought we'd never get in there, and I heard from other people that people are considering converting, wait 3 months for this security clearance. And of course it was pointless because when we arrived, the security guard just waved us through anyway. So it was really just going through the motions to exclude people. And I remember that Manasseh ben Israel, who was the head of the Amsterdam community in the 17th century, said that the majority of the people coming to the synagogue there were not Jewish because people were interested. Now, can we have a bit more of that?
Thank you, John. Chava? I'm writing the names down now.
Thank you. So York Liberal Community jumped straight into Mitzvah Day, and one of the amazing ways we increased our initial congregation was standing outside Sainsbury's supermarket with prepared little leaflets and handing them to everybody. And that actually is a very easy and sensible thing to do. You're there getting food for the food bank. I've got a question for both Dannys. Have you thought or have you encouraged anybody to study Chabad? You see, I'm from New Zealand and I'm from Switzerland before I came to the UK, and I saw amazing things happen from Chabad, where you think the community is completely inward-looking, and suddenly there's a house for Chabad, and suddenly everybody's welcome. But I've got a challenge for us too, and that's particularly the World Union, or I guess American Reform Judaism. I, along with a lot of people, look on the daily Chabad Torah study with a Hebrew and an English and an 11th century commentary from Rashi. I reckon we could do with a modern one, and that's my challenge to you.
Well, first of all, I invite you to go to the World Union website, wupj.org, and go to the Torah Learning site, and we collect Divrei Torah each and every week from, I think, 5 or 6 different regions in multiple languages, and we archive them here. So, yes, we do have serious Torah study going on our sites. We never show up as high on Google as Chabad, because we don't buy ads on Google like Chabad. But especially if you like them, if you like commentaries in Spanish or French, a lot of them there, but 2 or 3 dozens each week in English.
I think the answer is we haven't done a study, and as you know, I've got myself into trouble for talking about ultra-Orthodox organizations and Chabad pickling Judaism rather than preserving it in the 18th century. But one of the things, and one of the truthful things that I'm saying to all of us is the amount of money that Chabad has, despite all our successful entrepreneurs who are in liberal and reform synagogues We don't get those types of resources. That's the first thing. And partly we're going to have to challenge our own people to spend more on their religion, or as much on their religion as they do on their gyms, for spiritual health as well as physical health, if we're going to really rival some of these other organizations. But I also accept that now, particularly, and as you know, I'm a bit of a Luddite, but our younger rabbis and our younger youth workers and young people are using much more effectively social media, and even the staff at the staff at the Montague Centre. So there are ways that even without vast sums of money, we can begin to increase our profile, and I think that's quite important.
Just a final comment on Chabad. They are totally unself-conscious. That's never been our strength. Their marketing is very public, and they sometimes put things in marketing where we're not so sure how visible we want to be. They are not self-funded. In other words, they're not funded by dues or by the members of the congregations. They're funded by a huge fundraising machine that targets high net worth individuals to fund their projects, something that no one in the progressive Jewish world has ever done for program. We've done it for buildings, for physical plant, but we've never done it for our spiritual life, our spiritual growth. And the final thing that differentiates them is like the Mormon church, who send shluchim, who send every 18 and 19-year-old for a year or two of missionary work. That's how they populate, that's how they get their professional staff. They send people and they fund them for 2 or 3 years to start up congregations. And we don't have the resources to do it, nor do we have the rabbis or committed people who are willing to give up, for whom the general accepted rule in the community is you give up 2 or 3 years of your life to serve the movement and bring new people in. That's our own hesitancy.
But they end up with Jews who believe that Jewish souls are better than non-Jewish ones. I mean, let's be clear.
Philosophically, they're selling a Judaism I can't tolerate, but they're selling it much more effectively than we are.
At SBJC, we are becoming increasingly public. We have events that are open to the public. We invite members of the public to our services, and we fundraise for local non-Jewish charitable causes. But there are people within the community who fear being as public as we are. How do you balance their needs and their fears with that need, which I completely wholeheartedly endorse, to be public, to be proud, to go out there and sell ourselves?
Let's differentiate between our psychological or emotional fears and our security physical fears. Okay, I think about, this whole security at synagogues. How do we make sure that we find a way to vet and bring in and allow as many people to come in so they don't feel there's a barrier? That's an organizational thing that we can solve. But the emotional piece is much harder. To say that, yes, we are going to have to be public about this, and some people think that's not a thing that Jews do, or certainly that liberal Jews, progressive Jews do, advertising Judaism. So that psychological change, we can't be held prisoner to. Okay, it's a fear of change in general. The security, the physical security things, I think absolutely we can address.
Just briefly, it also needs a bit of leadership. Members of Kingston will know, when I went to become the rabbi in Kingston, when we were ordained, in 1989, one of the points I made to the council at the time was the only thing I knew happened there was yoga, because there was a great big yoga sign, and there was no sign for the synagogue or the fact that I was going to be the rabbi. Maybe it was my ego, but I said I didn't think I could serve a synagogue when I had to hide the fact that I was the rabbi. And I persuaded the council at the time. And
so you learned yoga?
No, so that would be beyond my capabilities. Persuading the council, actually, that we needed to increase the profile of the synagogue, and that the building needed to be known with all its risks. So it will require leadership from those of you who hear Danny's message to reassure people, because of course their physical security is important to them. But often, as we know, this is about never mind the psychological, it's often the physical security is actually people's fears are never reflecting the actuality. Make a comparison between your 18-year-old son and your 82-year-old grandmother. Think which is most fearful of being out in Kingston in the middle of the night. Think which one is most likely to be attacked. And you find the reverse is the case.
Hi. Like Ellie, I wear my kippah out all the time to try and to get people talking to me about Judaism. I think of it as like, you know, McDonald's, they've got those hats that say, ask me about our special offers. I think of it as like, ask me about liberal Judaism. And I would be really up for, I think this idea of going out on the street corners is brilliant. I would be really up for going out with tefillin on the street corners and setting up next to Chabad and saying, women, non-Jews, come and wrap tefillin. I have got a friend who's a Chabad rabbi, and I think one of the things they do really well, that is the next challenge for us, is they are very egalitarian, not in terms of gender, but in terms of how they distribute roles. Because literally, you can get to the age of 18 there, and as long as you haven't gone to prison and you've done a bit of Torah, you're a rabbi. And that is...
Don't tell Charles this.
That is, in a way, that's a really great thing for us, because what you get is you get a horizontal model of people going out with just enough Torah and just enough enthusiasm to get people excited. It's true, we don't have money, but that doesn't mean we don't have resources. Compared to them, we've got a lot more learning, a lot more enthusiasm, and a lot more energy. And all we need to do is channel it. I'm so up for what you're talking about. Thank you.
So I'm really aware that we have a great idiosyncratic sense of being British Jews, but my observation when I'm in the States is that it is brimming with confidence, particularly in Reform Judaism. And I would love it if you talk to us about how we become more confident, how we are more confident about investing more money in our professional development, making families feel that it's more worthwhile to spend a bit more to be part of a synagogue, never mind the gym membership or alongside the gym membership. But that is the dissonance that I experience. And you're here in your role as World Union, and it's brilliant that we're part of that. But what is there on the ground in terms of American Reform Judaism that we could learn from individual congregations, rabbis, members?
I want to reply, because this is very important. I did not grow up in a Reform Judaism that was confident. Okay, I grew up in the 50s and 60s where the vast majority of affiliated American Jews were conservative Jews who looked down their noses at Reform Jews. Through a series of very clear strategies, the North American movement repositioned itself in the late 70s and 80s and 90s over a variety of issues, and we're very public about it. Dealing with patrilineality and conversion was one. Being very public about our unambiguous egalitarian sense that women have total access to anything was another thing, and it knocked the stuffing out of the conservative movement, and gay rights was the third. The conservative movement, the Masorti movement, wasn't able to deal with those. They were focused on moving tradition forward, but weren't dealing with the human issues. And we were very public about that. That changed the Reform movement from being, a 20% affiliate group of North American Jews to now being about 45% of North American Jews. I think that between liberal Judaism and Reform Judaism here, you have human issues that the United Synagogue crowd will resonate to. We have to figure a way to market. That's a great role for the what's the association? What is it called? The Alliance. The Alliance. That's a marketing PR thing about progressive Judaism in general. I think we are where British Jews really are, but the majority of them just don't know who we are. And it's a very long strategy. You need a couple of clear rallying cries that you're very public. You can't go with everything at once, and you have to be willing to deal with being dumped upon by the Jewish press, who think, we're changing Judaism, we're ruining Judaism, and by our more traditional neighbors who are very involved, who are going to look down at us. But I honestly believe that we're doing the right thing for 21st century Jews. And we have to take the abuse. You can't convince the other side to be nice. That's what we're learning in all the Zionist politics and Israel politics. That's Reuven's role as chair of the IMPJ. We're not going to close down or not. I was thinking about the last comment. Not advertise on the Ayalon, on the freeway, because we're going to get some negative press about it. Davka, that's why we're going to do it. And so it's a slow overcoming of our emotional, insecurities. Let's pretend that we are British Judaism for the 21st century.
Friends, I'm really sorry. David and Phyllis and Josh would have been the next. We've just run out of time. I'm really, really sorry.
We're going to continue this conversation. It's one of the workshops tomorrow morning around.
Yeah, and Danny's here and he doesn't have a moment's rest, so you can catch him at a mealtime or any other time when he's not sleeping to have a further conversation with you. I want to thank Danny on behalf of the World Union, which we... were not only the founders of, Mattock was the first chairman, Lily Montague was the first secretary, but also to say that we've been always very active. My place on the World Board is now taken by Graham Carpenter, who's one of our board members, who's here. So we continue to play our role in the World Union, and Liberal Judaism will continue to play its role in some of these issues, including, as we did, leading campaigns on equal marriage, on Syrian refugees, and whatever the next campaign is that people need, you can be sure that Liberal Judaism will be there.